Welcome to the Red Chip Poker Podcast, where we share stories and strategies from the game's most fascinating minds. No matter where you are in your poker journey, there's always something new to learn. So let's get right into today's conversation with your host, Robbie Straczynski.
Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the Red Chip Poker Podcast. I'm your host, Robbie Straczynski, and our guest on today's episode is Rich Muny. That is a name that's surely familiar to anyone who has been following the fight to legalize online poker in the United States over the last few years, as Rich is the past vice president and president of the Poker Players Alliance. Rich, welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks for having me, Robbie. It's great to be with you.
Yeah, it's good to speak with you again. It's been a long time since you and I have spoken. In your history in the industry, it just goes way back. How did you first and when did you first get involved in poker advocacy?
It was way back when UGA passed, and thanks, Robbie, for asking. Because a lot of people don't really ask about way back at the prior history of this. It's easy to just think about it at Black Friday.
Right.
Around then. But I mean, before 2006, we had a really robust poker economy in the United States before Congress came in and passed the Unlawful Internet Gambling Enforcement Act, which turned out to be the beginning of the end of that era of online poker in the U.S. And I was an engineer at GE. I was designing jet engines, and I was just enjoying that. And I played some poker on the side, and fortunately, in that era, the competition wasn't very good. And especially for good game selection, it stayed away from people who actually knew how to play the game. You could do really, really well at it. And so I was kind of enjoying something of the freedom to be able to do what I wanted to do, kind of knowing that I could just play poker. I didn't have to be tethered to a 9-to-5 job if I chose not to, which was more of a 7 to 9 job.
Right.
When you work at a competitive company like GE, which I enjoyed that line of work, but I also enjoyed having some various options. So I was really getting into this game. I got into playing at least 40 hours a week back in 2003, kind of what we call the moneymaker boom. Mm-hmm. And make a long story short, 2006 rolled along. The government kind of came in and stepped in on what a lot of us consider our liberties. Mm-hmm. I took exception, and they started rounding up some people to help out on 2+2, and we started all just kind of banding together and telling lawmakers that we didn't approve their actions.
Mm-hmm. Well, how did you become such a powerful voice? I mean, like you said, there's a lot of people who say, hey, start chanting with with the picketing and with the signs and stuff. How did you get to sort of be at the forefront of that movement?
It just took coordination. I didn't really have any special tools. It was just, a lot of people were really upset when UG had passed. A lot of people wanted to make sure at least Congress heard our voice, and the President Bush at the time, had heard our voice. And it just took somebody to try to corral these voices, channel so that we would be heard. And I kind of stepped up, and I wasn't the only one, but it's just, things filtered out over time. And 2+2 was probably the biggest poker forum at the time. They probably still are. Poker forums were more instrumental in that era. And, people were just sitting around, what can I do? What can I do? And somebody finally said, well, here's what you can do. And I think that's kind of all it took to bring in a lot of people. So that's where I got my start. PPA had just started at the same time. John Pappas wasn't the president yet. His name was Bolsarek. And he meant well, and I'll never say a negative thing about him, but John really had good skills when it came to kind of organizing the community. So at that time, somebody had to be out there. People were kind of following what we were doing. John Pappas ascended to be the executive director of Poker Players Alliance, and that same day I joined the board of directors. So that's kind of started melding everything we were doing with what PPA was intended to do as well.
My familiarity with your work is two specific media that I know you were very active over the years. One is on social media, Twitter specifically, a little bit on Facebook as well. And plus you had a podcast, I believe it was called Poker Advocacy with Rich Muny. Is that right?
Yes, those were two of the venues we had. social media was just terrific to reach out to the community. But in terms of reaching out to lawmakers, we had a really outsized voice. It was before other organizations were really using social media to the full extent. I think we got on that bandwagon really early. We had quite a few lobbyists within PPA and then industry lobbyists, so we could really get direct feedback from what we're getting out of it. And lawmakers, they'd really hear from it because, you send them a letter, it's important, but they don't really sit there and read every single letter they get. But a lot of them would just take out their iPhone or BlackBerry in that era, whatever they're using, and kind of look at what they're seeing, what was on the Facebook page, who was tweeting them about what, and it kind of broke through the barrier between their staff and them. And a lot of them heard directly in a way that they weren't. So social media was a really effective tool, and I'm glad we were able to jump on that early. And we never stopped evaluating new tools, but in that era, Twitter and Facebook were really outsized. It didn't take a lot of activists to be heard by lawmakers. So that was a really effective tool, but it was also one where I could reach out to the poker community, so it kind of all worked together. You mentioned the webcast as well.
Sure.
Poker advocacy, we did that for about, I think we entered our 6th season, so we did a really nice job with that one in terms of just putting together a weekly podcast, and we broadcast that one live. So live broadcasting is always fun. We didn't edit them later on either, so whatever went through stayed. Whatever bloopers happened to be in there, they stayed. But I enjoyed doing that podcast as well, and we reached out to a lot of people. I was also always active on 2+2 and other kind of media in terms of poker forums.
Yeah, so absolutely.
We'd always reach the community that way as well.
I remember you had a dedicated thread there with the daily action plan, right? It was very active.
Yeah, the daily action plan I mentioned earlier, Robbie, where we had the social media was very good. We had other tools as well. Sometimes you write to them directly. Sometimes you actually bring guys and gals down to the meet with lawmakers directly when they're on break or something like that. And considering the size, I thought it was a very effective way. If you want to take 100 people or so scattered throughout the country, maybe sometimes 1,000, maybe sometimes low as 100, but however many are willing to participate every single day. Because some people won't do it every day. So the daily participation is different than the total. But it was a good way to kind of channel those voices, so it's not just one person calling their own congressman, and then instead of somebody hearing from 3 or 4 poker players, everybody that day heard from 1,000.
Yep, yeah, definitely strengthen numbers. Well, you've mentioned the 2+2 forums, a couple times, and over the last few months, something that I've noticed is you have penned an extensive series of articles for them for the 2+2 magazine. Is this your initiative or something that they had asked you to do?
Well, actually, Mason Malmuth did ask me directly, because I had a regular column on 2+2 that's gone back probably 5 years now. In their magazine. I mean, with PPA wrapping up, and I was talking to Mason about I was just going to stop writing at some point, and he had mentioned that would be kind of neat to have the history of PPA out there, and I agreed. So, although I'd already stepped aside, from PPA, we probably talked about that a little bit as PPA transitioned to the Poker Alliance.
Yep.
And looking at what I was going to do, I thought, well, this would be nice to kind of get a historical perspective, because it's easy to forget. Especially something like our kind of fight, which the day-to-day stuff, it's not going to be reported anywhere. And it's hard. You look at the big things like Pennsylvania passed online poker, but not today. So it's kind of nice. It turned out to be 4 columns. I hope everybody listening will check it out. Just go to 2plus2.com, and then you'll see the magazine tab on the left-hand side. And like you said, there are 4 of them. I'll have a look and kind of see what we did. Hope everyone will find the article interesting.
Sure. And, you did a really deep dive. And, before we move forward, I do want to just take, a little bit of a closer look just at that past. And, I read every word of those 4 articles. And, you took a deep dive into the history of what is it that the PPA accomplished over that past decade. And, you were on the front lines. So maybe there's a couple of things that you could point to that for you personally were highlights over your tenure there.
Probably the most fascinating thing was the very fact that we could form as an organization to stand up for ourselves. UG had passed 317 and 53. It had majority support from both parties in Congress. The leadership of both parties supported it. I mean, going from that point and even being able to make any kind of impact was just stunning in and of itself. I mean, if you start off after you're already defeated, it was almost, I mean, hardly anybody came out in opposition to UG. You had Ron Paul, representative from Texas, who was against the bill before we were, I like to say, because he was kind of a lone voice, probably didn't even have any poker voices out there on his side. So we kind of started, like I said, the very formation of it, I think, was very interesting. We put up a really credible fight for federal legislation right up until Black Friday. We had and support us kind of out of nowhere, just because, mainly because he thought it was an opportunity to get the other online casino gaming, banned. And it kind of saw an opportunity. Well, if I let poker through, I could kind of have a deal here. Well, yeah, we'll let them have poker, and in exchange, we can ban everything else. Now, of course, BPA wasn't trying to ban anything, but we did want somebody on our side. So, that was an interesting shift that he saw. I'm really not going to be able to ban online poker in this environment, which is a pretty big change. And then, of course, Black Friday happened. After Black Friday, I mean, there are a few accomplishments that are really easy to see. I think the one I'm most proud of was getting the money to the players for Full Tilt Poker. I mean, it looked like that money was gone. I had about 5 figures myself, and who wouldn't think it was gone? We got that back. Now, people point and say, well, PokerStars provided the assets, and I'm sure there was behind-the-scenes stuff because DOJ wanted players to get back. That's all true. What happened after that was even more astounding, because we got the money back for Ultimate Poker and Absolute Poker and Ultimate Bet players.
Right.
That looked dead in the water. I mean, not a person could have predicted that there's any chance to get that back. But we were able to make the case that the DOJ should treat that pot of money as like kind of an aggregate pot of money to be treated for everything, because it was one case, U.S. versus PokerStars et al. Now, you got to imagine the DOJ, if they don't give the money away, they get to keep it. So they're incentivized to keep it. Right. So you really have to make the case. They're not just looking. It's not like their default position trying to give it away. But they dealt with us very well. They dealt from a clean deck, and they weren't trying to keep the money. But my point is, it's not like their first responsibility is try to give it to anybody who asks for it. But we made the case, and like I said, it looked impossible. But they took that. They went ahead and did it wasn't an instantaneous process. We all know remission takes a few years. But by then, we didn't hear any complaints, because those Ultimate Bet people kind of gave up that any money was going to be coming their way. And to get a 100% reimbursement was probably quite shocking to the entire community. And nobody can say that was anybody but PPA. So I thought that was just really proof that if we came together and organized, we could get something good out of it.
Definitely
one more accomplishment would be the Pennsylvania bill, getting online poker done in Pennsylvania, getting it done in Pennsylvania. I mean, that just looked like pretty big. It is a pretty big challenge, especially with Sheldon Adelson, of course, a billionaire mega donor who owns the Las Vegas Sands. Of course, that's Venetian and Palazzo. He had the Sands Bethlehem. So we had a local base to oppose us, but we managed to get that one done.
Yeah, well, definitely a lot to be proud of. And as mentioned, those articles that we had spoken about earlier on the 2+2 magazine go into further detail about those accomplishments. So definitely highly recommend reading it. And when we come back, we will look towards the future a little bit and get Rich's views on what's in store in the continued fight for legal online poker in the United States. But first, a little strategy break.
Hello, this is Doug Hull with Red Chip Poker, and I'm bringing you Mission 4 from my book, Poker Plays You Can Use. You can pick that up on Amazon, Red Chip Poker, or 3barrelbluff.com. If you remember, Mission 1 was about identifying situations called bread and butter situations. What those are situations where you put in the last aggressive action pre-flop, and you have 1 or 2 opponents. Those opponents are both out of position to you. And what we found in that observational mission is that being in position with the initiative going into the flop makes you a favorite to win that pot post-flop. This is not a style of play that is going to stay exactly in your game forever. This is just one mission, and it is going to increase your aggression. Pre-flop, for this mission, what you're going to do is only enter into hands where you think it is reasonable that you have bread and butter situation, or that you win the pot immediately, or that you get all in pre-flop. So that is your mission. If you think that you can't do one of those three things, then you're just going to fold. You can keep playing the hand if it doesn't work out that way, but what we're going to do is take actions pre-flop so that we always have the initiative and have that bread and butter situation, or we just win the pot immediately, or we get all in pre-flop. Any of those would be acceptable. So this is going to make your game a lot more aggressive, and I think it's going to be good for you. Now, as you're doing this, you may find some spots where it would have been better to call behind rather than 3-bet. You may even find some spots where limping behind would have been better. And so we say that this is not a style that you're going to adopt forever, but it's going to move that pendulum towards aggression. And then as you've done this, you'll find that you want to swing back to a little bit less aggression, and it will bring you to a better place. All right, you can look to core in the pre-flop section to get more information on playing pre-flop. Until then, let's get back to the podcast.
Hey everybody, welcome back. It's Robbie Straczynski here on the Red Chip Poker podcast with our guest, Rich Muny. During the introduction, I'm sure some astute listeners noted that at the top of the show I mentioned the word past vice president, past president of the Poker Players Alliance. And I have to admit, when I first saw that word myself, it came as a bit of a surprise. I had not realized, Rich, that you had stepped away from the active fight. When exactly did that happen, and what led you to make that decision?
Well, thanks for asking, because it is important to share. It's just an interesting story, because despite our successes, the financial end of the fight was always very key. And that's always the biggest challenge, because it really costs a lot of money to run these things. We we started running short. We didn't really have corporate support at the level we needed to continue this fight. The last year of it, we're all, we weren't being paid. We're just all on a volunteer basis for the most part, just trying to continue on what we could while we tried to bring in more funding for the fight. And we got pretty fortunate. These, the guys over at Poker Central believed in what we're doing, and they were willing to take on the fight. They don't want to do it alone. They're looking for other corporate support as well, I'm sure. And I hope that call will be heard, because that's what I see on their website of what they're really trying to do. So what happened was we were able to kind of work with them for them to continue on the fight. And so PPA transitioned to the Poker Alliance.
Right. That was the rebranding, I guess.
Yeah. It's a rebrand. It's over at pokeralliance.com. I was able to stay on for a few months to help out with the transition. I was happy to do that. John Pappas stayed on with them. And I know he's still helping now, certainly through the end of the year. Don't know his future plans there either, but we're all trying to support, the new group as they go forward. They've done some neat things. They came out to Kentucky to testify for online poker, and they did some advocacy out in Florida as well for Amendment 3, which kind of is going to make it harder to pass some various casino stuff. They're working on ramping up as well. But I've had a chance to meet with Mark Brenner, who's their new president, and I know he's working diligently on that as well. So anybody listening, hopefully you'll kind of go check out Poker Alliance and make sure to help out what they're doing. In my regard, I did this for over 10 years, and I was kind of happy to, pass the torch, kind of let some new blood come in and some new voices and new ideas, fresh ideas. I think there's some good ideas myself, and I try to do them with them as well. But I think that's the natural progression, is to have somebody with, pocket deep enough pockets to continue the fight. I mean, we're on fumes the whole last year of it. We're reaching out actively to try to be able to figure out a way to, financially continue this push for all poker. So we're glad that we didn't just have to shut the doors and leave a board. So we're really happy about that we're able to work.
Excellent. Well, nonetheless, again, like you point to your 10 years of experience, you're obviously still an expert when it comes to these sort of matters. And I guess I got to ask you, sort of looking forward, we all know that at this point, online poker is already legal in Pennsylvania. When do you foresee sites opening for business there? And how long do you think it'll take them to join the existing interstate networks?
Well, I haven't been following the Pennsylvania one day to day, as you know, but based on the timeline, I mean, certainly 2019 is going to look, promising in terms of getting it done. And I wouldn't really put a prediction on the month. We have seen more and more, more and more of the companies, the casinos, suggesting, putting in their applications and willing to enter the space. It's really hard to predict when they're all going to join up. I think the regulators are going to want to be comfortable that they're regulating their state sites well, as will the other 3 states.
Sure.
On the current compact, will also want to make sure the game is effectively regulated in Pennsylvania. And that'll require data, not just, so it's more complicated than it looks. I mean, from the outside, it'll be obvious. I'm sure it'll be obvious it's well regulated there. I'm sure nobody will have a question, because every state that's done it to date has done a good job. And Pennsylvania really has a terrific regulatory body, but there'll still be a lot of, reviewing the data, reviewing what's going on internally. That's the kind of stuff we'll be able to see. But they'll take a deep dive, and at some point they'll be able to negotiate that out, how they want to proceed in terms of merging it together. But the good news is the framework is there. Nevada and New Jersey would seem to be natural competitors in this space. I mean, those are the first 2 states that came forward just with casino gaming. So they've been competitors from the get-go. Yet they came together with a compact, and they invited Delaware, which is not a really big state, to be an equal part of it. So these are all those both things are good signs, and they bode well to Pennsylvania being able to join in.
Right. I think at this point, the people are experienced enough and the parties involved enough to realize that, increased liquidity and the more people involved, the better it is for everybody. It's, just having a larger pie for everyone to share from rather than 4 small pies. I think that's just sort of understood. But, taking that theory into practice, like you said, it does take steps, it does take time. So hopefully, I guess that'll happen more quickly than less quickly, and people will band together. Beyond Pennsylvania, what are, I guess, the next battleground states?
I think, just to back up for a moment, I do think that's one of the bigger challenges we saw was prior to UGA passing in 2006, and even all the way up to Black Friday in 2011. We're just used to a national poker economy.
Right.
Really an international one, but you could play anywhere from the U.S. and you could play players from around the world. So they're always really big. There's a lot of liquidity. You always had the game you wanted to play. Even toward the end, I mean, limit poker was starting to dry up, but you can still find games. Now you're kind of at a whim because it's a smaller pot, and it did make volunteerism harder, because you go to someone and tell them they have to fight for online poker every day, and then they'd say, "Oh, so what's the goal?" I said, "Well, perhaps someday we'll have it in some state. It might not be your state, but we might have poker coming, and it's probably going to be a small player pool for quite a while. Right. And eventually we might be able to, team together." Like, well, that's not what I wanted. I just wanted to be able to tell somebody real quick that I want what I used to have, which is an international game in every state in the U.S. Our political system just isn't set up for that. So I think that presented a challenge, but we did come up with this framework. So at least there is a road forward, and that's what we're looking for these new states to be able to join into as well. So, I hope everyone listening will just see what we did in Pennsylvania and say, it is possible. I mean, it's not easy, but it's possible. So now you have these other states. You have like New York, Michigan, Illinois is going to be considering it to some degree. New York has just been a kind of a weird state on this. It's in Michigan as well. It's kind of similar. We have some people who really want to push it forward. It's blasting through committee, and it looks like it has a lot of momentum. It looks like a nice shot, and then the other body doesn't even talk about it. It's like in New York, the Senate is really gung ho for it, but the Assembly even though Pretlow has been a supporter of it, it just seems to die out. And it's a big challenge to push these forward. But I think those are the states that'll be next. New York and Michigan, probably one of those two will be next. California is sort of in the mix, but the tribes start on board. Nothing's going to happen until they are, at least in my opinion. And that's kind of how it's going to go. And then
each of those states is very, very populous, has, considerable potential player pools. And, any of those names that you mentioned, should any of them come on board, obviously a big boon to the existing states that have legalized it and to, further expand the interstate system. So, perhaps it's possible that the much heralded recent sports betting legislation may pave the way.
I think the very fact that that exists has helped a lot because it's bringing gaming legislation in. It's expanding gaming. Usually, if you're expanding gaming, that kind of expands it in people's heads that it's okay to play this sort of stuff, which is generally good for poker. I think it's a positive. I think on the bricks and mortar front, I think bringing in sports betting is going to help. They're located they're often located next to one another in physical casinos for a reason. So I think it's going to help the bricks and mortar game.
Right.
Online, I know they don't want to be. It just depends who has the most momentum. In some states are going to be coupled, and some states are just going to be done independently. But I do think it's a positive for the game, and I think it's generally positive just for the way people think of it. I mean, people have just thought of online poker as you can go your internet and just do whatever. It's completely unregulated. People are seeing the reality is much different. Sports has a natural home online, and I think. So I just see that in the future helping to propel this whole thing forward to some degree.
Well, I certainly hope so. I mean, in a sense, the entire fight, you've been around for so long, it parallels a poker tournament in a way. You can't just, we would love to go ahead and be in the winner's circle after one hand, but it's not the way it works. You have to grind it out, one level after the next and, mow down your opponents until you can finally make it to that final table and taste that sweet taste of victory. And in a sense, as long as the fight has been and as frustrating as it has been, so many obstacles, there is a sweetness, every time that there is a new accomplishment, a new state goes online, it will feel like, hey, we've earned this and we've finally gotten back at least some of what we had taken for granted in the past. I suppose just one last call it the $1 million question or the $64,000 question for our older listeners out there. Well, let's say we're always talking about another state, join the interstate network, but to truly get back to that quote unquote best case scenario would be if the U.S. would go ahead and open its door of player pools to the rest of the world. Realistically speaking, do you think that this is something that within the next 5 years or so we could see happening someday?
It's built into the New Jersey legislation. It's not impossible, but we just haven't seen a big push toward that yet within the various states. I think right now they're looking to partner up with each other and kind of shore up the regulatory stuff internally. It's kind of sad, but we have seen some of the states that don't have it even suggesting they don't have to partner with other states. They seem to think their states are big enough to go it alone. Like New York, we got at a gaming conference, the Speaker Pretlow, Assembly Speaker Pretlow, who is a sponsor of that bill, came and started addressing them and said, New York is a huge state. We really don't need to partner up with anybody else. California has repeatedly said the same thing. But the experience of big states hasn't borne that out at all for obvious reasons. I mean, for one thing, they're only on one time zone, well, sometimes two, but they're geographically in the same vicinity, obviously, from one end of the state to the other. So at 3 a.m, you don't get the assist from the other side of the globe to keep the games going. So just by definition, you're going to see some differences just based on when people are available to play. And states, whole states might not be big enough. They seem some of them think they are, but these are not experts in actually running the games. They just think they're in big states.
Sure. Well, I mean, that's one of the things. Although those of us who've been around for as long, I guess, as you and I have, we remember what it was like. You can log on at 2 p.m, 2 a.m, whatever time it was, and there's always a game going because of that worldwide liquidity. So hopefully, I don't know if there'll be that boom again, but hopefully, over time, we'll continue grinding away and we will see a continued improvement and hopefully some sort of a worldwide player pool as the years go on. Well, Rich, it was a pleasure speaking with you again and interviewing you. Is there anything else you'd like to say to our listeners here at the Red Chip Poker Podcast before we let you go?
I just want And thanks for having me, Robbie. I appreciate that.
Sure.
I do want to encourage everybody to remember to, let your lawmakers know, when you want something, don't just let them do it and just assume they don't hear your voice. They really do, to a surprising degree. One thing we ran into is you do the activism and it wouldn't necessarily move legislation and people think it didn't do any good. But you did have a lot of lawmakers who did hear it, and they understood that that's what their constituents want, at least more so than the people who were trying to get it banned or trying to block ongoing legislation. And some of these lawmakers really thought they'd hear from a lot of people opposed to online poker based on their preconceived notions, and they didn't hear from too many people at all on that. On the opposition side, but they heard from a lot of supporters of such legislation. And that's why it's important to let these lawmakers know, because how are they going to know if we don't tell them?
That's right. It's just like the same thing. You're never going to win the lottery if you don't buy the ticket. Same exact thing there. Rich, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure speaking with you.
Thanks, Robbie. Good luck with everything.
Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode. But don't stop learning now. Head over to redchippoker.com. You'll find everything you need to get better today. Join our free, friendly strategy group and to start talking poker with our coaches and community. And listen, if you're ready to take poker more seriously, sign up for Core, our $5 a week complete training platform built for players who have limited time to study. Core is packed with over 100 bite-sized lessons from the fundamentals to advanced strategies, quizzes, achievements, discussion threads, and more. And for the bravest of heart, we invite you to check out our pro membership, which includes 24/7 access to hundreds of videos, all of our playlists, all of our crash courses, and more. If you want to see what the top 1% of players are studying to keep their edges razor sharp, visit redchippoker.com/Ruby. That's RUBY, and get a special deal on your first 3 weeks. Until next time, run good, play better, and get there.